I always find the long introduction at the beginning of a video to be quite boring to listen to and boring to record. However, I also feel like it's kind of important to let you guys know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. For a couple of years I've been messing around with an airbrush, which I quite dislike. It clogs all the time, it's pretty much impossible to reach inside it to clean it, and it wastes a lot of paint. Although paint is cheap, so that's not a big issue. It still takes way longer to base coat with an airbrush than it does with a real brush or a rattle can, just because of how long it takes to set up and how long it takes to clean. But there are a few interesting things you can do with an airbrush that are either impossible or much more difficult to do without one. There's been this crystally thing on the Thingiverse, and as soon as I printed it, I lost the link, so I have no idea who designed it. It's really nice though. I got started with the airbrush like I mentioned, just to get some base coats down, but ultimately I wanted to end up with a glowing crystal effect, and that's the thing that pros do with airbrushes, so I should be able to do this. No, I did not manage to do that. Starting off, I gave the rocks a green base coat, an odd colour for rocks, you think? Well, stick with me, because when you give rocks painted in some odd colour a black wash and then a grey dry brush, they look like really nice scale rocks without just being a boring grey. I'd noticed that some of the crystals had some bright yellow still visible, and that's the colour resin that I printed this in, and so I wanted a nice dark contrast for the bright red that's coming along shortly, and so I sprayed with black first, ensuring to get all of the tiny cracks and all of the crystals just absolutely everywhere when the tiniest speck of yellow was visible, but also I went around all of the sides of the crystal as well with a little bit of an overspray. So when I went over it with the red as well, I had this nice contrast from the rock effect into the black and into the red. And in defense of the airbrush, this is probably the best tool for this sort of thing. If you keep going at a model with a rattle can until every crack and crevice is covered, you'll flood that model and lose all of the detail. This is actually a fairly common issue with priming with rattle cans. People just use it way too heavily. And of course, if you tried to do this sort of thing with a normal brush, you'll be there all week and you'll just leave streaks. Like I said, I wanted to make this a nice glow effect, but I just suck with the airbrush too much to actually achieve that. It was basically impossible for me to get a consistent red. Because of that overspray, anywhere I went back to give a second or third coat to, everything around it would also get some extra as well, and in many ways the inconsistency like this adds to the natural variety. And that's often something I really like when painting. But if you wanted a consistent coat, well, it's just that much harder to do. But the airbrush clogged, and so I cleaned it out, and then I wasn't really able to achieve what I wanted with the red, and then it clogged again, and I kind of gave up in a hissy fit and finished the painting of this piece with a real brush. And I didn't do actually that much more work to it. And annoyingly, I did manage to drop it on the way from table to table and cracked one of the crystals off, but 3D printing resin does tend to snap cleanly, making it fairly easy to repair. I added a little visual texture with some scratchy black lines running down the largest of crystals and occasionally on some of the more prominent smaller ones. I messily picked out a few areas with red as well, and quickly this fell into an edge highlight, unsurprisingly, and if I'm going to edge highlight, I may as well do it properly and bring in a very high value pink. I never did achieve the true glowing effect that I had wanted. I would have to go to a much higher value than the red I went with in the first place, so in this case the simple lining work was all I did. The second model I want to show off today also provided me quite a few difficulties with the airbrush, just different ones. This is a misprinted Mind Flayer from Mantic Games, and I had the silly idea to paint the entire thing solely with the airbrush. That didn't happen. Things started well, to be fair, and I have this beautiful glossy purple, but I mixed in a bit of matte black so that the overall paint mix was just about matte enough to be a good base colour for a lighter colour blue going over the top. And I painted all of the kind of the main body, and as I was going to the highlights, I sprayed with some directionality, but without being necessarily too strict on what that direction was, just kind of from the top-ish. And what I especially wanted to do is highlight the stretched or prominent parts of the model to draw the attention to those places. And I had that pretty nicely how I wanted. I thought it looked quite good with the work I did with the airbrush. And so I could base coat the exposed brains with a cartoonishly brain-coloured pink, and it would be great. Except, it didn't come out as pink. I cleaned the airbrush and gave it another 4 or 5 layers, and the pink was still coming out as light blue. I even stripped the airbrush down to scrub any blue paint out of it, and more layers still did not come out as pink. Eventually, I admitted defeat and I used the airbrush to rebuild the blue just to be sure that the blue was how I wanted it on the body of the creature, and switched over to a real brush, but still the same pink. And oh, would you look at that, it goes down in one coat really easily, bright and prominent pink. Something that this combination of the exact same paint but with the airbrush couldn't achieve. I did give this a mimetic 2 thin coats, although maybe I didn't thin them quite as consistently as I should have done. And after that, I went round to do some of the details of the model, the eye, the many toothy mouths, before striping in some of the chitin. This is an effect on the sample picture on Mantic's website, and I really liked it, so I copied it. The last, most disturbing and certainly the most appropriate step was some fake blood effect fancy dress stuff from Halloween like 3 years ago or something. At first I tried to paint this on like a smooth layer because I'm in the mindset of painting a miniature, but no, that's not how this stuff works. You gotta glob this stuff on in lumpy nasty dribbles and drops. That's just nasty, and it looks fantastic. So these 2 models, or 1 model and terrain piece, I painted partially with the airbrush, and it gave me troubles, clogs, paint consistencies, paint transparency, cleaning, overspray, inconsistency and inconsistency again. Just a whole lot of trouble in one little machine. But it can be made to work, and it can do things that sometimes can't be done without it, or can be done but it's easier with it. Maybe I just need to buy myself a really nice airbrush, because this is a really cheap starter one, and that could be the problem I'm having. Now that I know what I'm doing with an airbrush, or at least I've got the basics down, well, at least I'm getting stuff painted, and I hope you guys at home are as well, with whatever tools you prefer to use. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.